Hello, friends. We are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. The views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Karen Holton. First, watch the Forbidden documentary, A Cult Louisiana. That's on Tubi and multiple streaming platforms. Get a Rokfin premium membership, rokfin.com/FKN Plus. Get access to all our premium content and all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin. Also, download our podcast episodes directly through Spreaker. That is always free for you. And we are booking guests for February. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today, I want to welcome back to the show Karen Holton. She is an experiencer, holistic coach, author, and host of the Quantum Guide Show and Aliens and Angels podcast. Karen, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks so much for having me on your show. I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you so much for coming back on. Always enjoy our conversations. Today, we're going to further explore your contact and paranormal experiences shared in your new book, Transdimensional, Meet the New Neighbors. Now, human contact with non-human intelligences has been reported since the earliest documented history. It's really the basis of all theological belief systems. And yet, in our modern age, many people still reject the possibility of something beyond this material reality. And unfortunately, they view people that have these experiences as either crazy or scammers or even nowadays CIA assets. Now, I'll never claim to have any of the answers to anything, but I do know with 100% certainty that there's much more to this reality just beyond what we can normally perceive. And I really enjoy having people like yourself who have these experiences. I myself didn't have any experiences until I went seeking through different methods like meditation, psychedelics. But people like yourself who have these experiences basically come to you is really fascinating. And I love trying to understand the mechanics behind all this. So a lot to get to. Before we do, just remind the audience a little bit about yourself and where they can find you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Well, you can find me on most platforms, and I go by at Karen Holton TV. So if you just plug that into Google, you should find all my content. But of course, I'm also a member of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, and all my audio podcasts are available from forbiddenknowledge.news. And I also have a website, www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com. And that's KARENHOLTON healthcoach.com. So you can find tons of free resources there. I have a shop if you want to support my work. And of course, links to Amazon worldwide, where you can find my book in both paperback and Kindle. Now, because it's a new publication, if you just go to Amazon and type in the name of the book, it might not show any results. You might actually have to go to the Amazon bookshop or the Kindle bookshop to actually find my book, but it's there. And I'm very excited to offer that to everybody so they can learn about what's possible. What's not only possible, But I have several things that I have had happen to me that you wouldn't believe how many other people have had it happen to them, but they've discounted those experiences because they don't want to be stigmatized, made fun of, or they're just not realizing those are real things.
Let's jump right into some of your experiences. I know you shared many of them here before, but let's jump in as it relates to your book and possibly the triggering mechanics behind first contact. For many, I know that it's trauma that triggers a lot of these experiences. That's a very interesting correlation to many other experiencers that I've interviewed. They may have had some sort of childhood traumatic experience, and then paranormal type activity would follow, and oftentimes it would lead to extraterrestrial or other type of non-human contact. Tell us a little bit about what led up to your experiences.
Well, like a lot of other people, trauma. And I do get a little bit in my book about what I went through as a child. It's certainly other people have had worse situations. It's not a contest. And we all experience trauma in our own way, but it absolutely does affect us. And it's almost like it's part of the divine plan that when something is taken away from us, something else is given to us as well. So, for instance, those of us who have had trauma, it holds us back from a lot of the opportunities that other people seem to become natural to them. It affects the way we think about ourselves, what we view as possible for ourselves. And interestingly, like there's a saying that says, when a door closes, a window opens. And it's not that it's okay that we went through these horrible circumstances, but they do seem to affect what I'm going to call the receiver wavelength of our brain so that we're able to have experiences, let's say, that takes into account our six senses. So just as our five senses, our smell, taste, sight, touch, hearing, all that stuff, that assists us on a very physical three-dimensional level. But our other senses come into the fore and they protect us, I believe, on a spiritual and even psychological level. So I had some really horrible things happen to me. I talk a little bit about it just to give the reader the gist of what I mean by I had trauma in my life, because for some people it's a dog ate my ice cream cone. For somebody else, it's horrible, horrible events. And but I don't get into it a whole lot because, first of all, it's disturbing, but it's also deeply personal. But it gives the readers the gist so that you can see. And then what did I do with those experiences? And I'll give you an example. By the time I was 5 years old, I had already been fairly severely traumatized, and it manifested itself in huge fear. I was terrified of the dark. Now, this is not uncommon. A lot of people are going to hear what I say and go, wait a minute, that applies to me as well. And that's what I want. I want us to start getting more comfortable realizing that we're transdimensional. So, what would happen to me is I'd go to bed at night and I'd tuck the covers all around me, under my legs, around my body, and I'd have my head under the covers and them all tucked in tight because I felt so unsafe. But I also was aware of, let's just call other realms, realities that my parents or my brothers and sisters would never agree to because they never had these sensations that I had. So I was already opened up to a deep level of sensitivity. So here I was terrified at night. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't breathe under the covers. It was horrible. And one night, this beast or creature appeared to me, and it appeared to me as a fiery griffin. I didn't find out till I was in my 20s that it was a griffin. I didn't know what a griffin was in those days, but it had the head and the beak of an eagle. It had the eagle wings, and it had the body of a lion, except it was all made up of fire. And it came to me, and somehow I just knew it was there to protect me and look after me and to make sure no harm came to me. So every night I went to bed, when I started falling into fear, I would summon my griffin. It would come Now, I don't remember if I saw it with my physical eyes or in the portal. I call it the portal of my imagination or what, but it was absolutely real to me and it protected me. And it was the most wonderful thing. So there's an example of a transdimensional experience that happened to me when I was very young. Now, I've had other transdimensional experiences. I just wrote a quick list. Um, when I was very young, like 5 years old, 6 years old, seven, eight, even nine or 10, I had these vivid dreams of flying and they were in full color. Now, I had no idea what things looked like from an aerial perspective. It wasn't until I was later on, like grade 7 or 8 in school, that we saw documentary films that were shot from planes. And then I got to see what an aerial view was like. And it always made me wonder, how did I know what things look like from high up in the sky? But I used to have these vivid dreams of flying. Many, many people have had these, but they just discount them as not being real. How did we know? Everything was in full color. I was fully conscious. And when I would fly high above, I could see the rivers and the lakes, streams, mountains, everything clearly below me. And sometimes I dipped down really low and I could feel the grass tickle my legs. It was the most amazing, amazing experience. And so, like, how can you explain that? I believe that was a transdimensional experience. There's a part of us that can travel outside of our body. Um, Later on, as a young adult, I was able to transfer consciousness. So one time I was at a place called Stodom Falls on Vancouver Island, and they have these big, huge, giant river rocks. And it was in this like early summer, and I was laying on my back looking up, and I saw an eagle way up there in the sky. And I just for a moment, I had the feeling like I wish I was able to see what the eagle sees. Quick as a flash. It didn't last, like not even a second, it didn't last. But I was able to see myself down on the river rock looking up. And I was sharing consciousness with the eagle. So I actually tried to do it again and it didn't happen. But I practiced. And after a while, I was able to have glimpses, very short moments where I was able to enter the consciousness or share consciousness with eagles and see myself down below and see the beautiful landscape, very similar to the dreams of flying, but this time I shared it with an eagle. And one other thing I want to quickly tell you is one time I was in bed at night and there was a little bit of light filtering in from the street, and I had a cat. And I used to store boxes and stuff underneath my bed. And my cat was creating a big ruckus under my bed. And I went, what the heck is she doing down there? And all of a sudden, in a flash, I could see through my cat's eyes. And she was chasing a spider. And the thing that was really interesting about this, Chris, is the spider had luminous stripes and spots on it that reflected the light from my cat's eyes, because that's how they see in the dark. They reflect light, they cast it out onto things. And this was flashed back to my cat so she could see the spider, and she was chasing this great big spider. And that lasted for, probably 2 or 3 seconds. And I came out of it and I went, holy shit, I had no idea that spiders had luminous spots and stripes, but no wonder my cat was so interested in chasing the spider. So that's just a few of the early different ways I experience what I'm going to loosely call transdimensional contact. And I firmly believe this is available to all of us, and especially those of us who've been traumatized. Now, when you've been traumatized, we do need to go back and do the work to sort ourselves out. We need to understand that it wasn't our fault, that it shouldn't have been, but it did happen. And this is how we deal with it. It is important to not be drowning in what I would call the victim mentality, because that seems to put a dampening on our spiritual and our transdimensional abilities. But when we work our way through it and we get to a point where we can forgive, and we don't forgive the other person for their sake, not at all. We forgive ourselves. And I'm sorry, we forgive the other person, but we do it for ourselves because it sets us free, and it breaks that bond, that trauma bond that we shared before. And so those kind of that kind of work, the reward is then we're left with what we didn't realize we had, which was these paranormal abilities, and they stay with us for the rest of our life. And it's amazing. And nobody's talking about it, not in mental health, not in the medical professions, not in the religions. That's not something talked about. And so I'm very open about that in my book because I know I'm not the only one. It's not like Karen's so special. She had all these adventures. No, I just was able to recall, document, and sort of chart how I was able to come to the place that I was able to have those experiences. And there are many, many types of contact. I'll get into that in a minute, but I want to stop in case you have comments, Chris, or things you want to add to it.
The only thing I'd add, it seems like people who have the traumatic experiences, they can evolve in different ways. If, like you said, you do some healing work, it correlates with a lot of people that have positive experiences with non-human intelligences. Also, on the other end of that, you have the people who kind of stay in this fear-based mentality and the experiences remain dark or maybe even become even more malevolent. That leads to a whole nother conversation that I'd like to continue later after we get into some more of your experiences, because it opens up a whole Pandora's box of possibilities as to what this is, and I love exploring those. But please
Mhm.
continue.
Well, I wanted to get into a little bit about the different kinds of contact that I've had. It's not all extraterrestrial.
Sure.
And I want everybody to know that I'm not an expert. And so I'm not a crypto geologist or whatever they're called. And I'm filtering my experiences through my own perceptual arena to what makes sense for me. And I'm putting language to things that are not talked about and that I'm not well read about. And so I may have some of these not right. So it's basically a construct I've created to explain the kind of beings that I've had contact with. And I'm just going to read it directly from the book because it's more concise. So I've had contact with extraterrestrials, and I believe these are interdimensional beings who are usually perceived as corporeal, which means that they're alive and physical, and they're not indigenous to Earth. And we call them extraterrestrial because they do not come from Earth, they come from other worlds. And then there's interdimensionals. These are beings who are generally non corporeal, which means they're not physical the way you and I are, and they're not indigenous to Earth, but they live in other realms. And then there's ultradimensionals. These are beings who are generally non corporeal, means they're not physical the way we are, but they are indigenous to Earth and they coexist with us, although usually in another realm, which means that basically they are beyond our physical senses. So, Chris, we see in a very narrow band of color, of light, the light spectrum, the sound spectrum, even touch. So there's so much that could be going on around us that we're not aware of. To us, they don't exist, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. And then there's crypto-terrestrials. These are beings who we might think as ETs, but they're actually indigenous to Earth. And they may be corporeal, but they're also usually interdimensional. And they have advanced technology to hide them from our view. They can live deep within the oceans or within mountain ranges or heavily forested areas. And I've not seen these face to face, but I suspect their influence from time to time. So that could include Bigfoot. That could include, the remote viewers who see things creatures that look like what we call grays, that have these huge communities underground or inside mountains, things like that, right? Then there's angels, and these are beings who usually have the choice to be corporeal or non corporeal, and they're not indigenous to Earth. They come from another realm, which we commonly think of as a dimension called heaven. Then there's elementals, and these are beings referred to as fairies, gnomes, elves, even machine elves, etc. And they can be corporeal or non-corporeal, and they exist as interdimensional beings. Some are indigenous to Earth and some are not. Regardless of the folklore that you believe in, their purpose can generally be boiled down to include repair and maintenance of the time-space continuum. Then there's ancestors. These are human beings who are our genetic and foster ancestors who were corporeal and are indigenous to Earth, but they're now deceased. And you could say that they are here within our physical and or the energetic components to our genetic code. That's what links us to them. And think of them as being here, but in another earthly realm. And then there's disembodied Earth people. These are human beings who are not genetically or energetically linked to our DNA, who were corporeal in the past, but they are now deceased, and they are available to assist when we initiate contact and ask for help. And so that is not an exhaustive list, but it just gives you a glimpse of the kind of transdimensional contact we have. And there's a lot of overlap, like ETs overlap with interdimensionals, which overlap sometimes with the angelic realms, depending on their spiritual quality. A lot of this is sort of more in what I would call frequency-based dimensional realms rather than what we think of as in physical. But that's a lot of help that we have and a lot of contact, and it explains everything. And I think there's a lot of beings who we have maybe not realized they exist. And even learned people of old. I know lots of people who have had contact from, say, Socrates or Sun Tzu, or they've reached out to them as energy signatures because they need help with a specific thing, strategizing, or how to understand philosophically certain concepts. And so the thing is that they're not gone. They're here, but we're not normally able to recognize them. And when we learn to start receiving messages from them, it usually starts by coming across as flashes of insight. We can see visual overlays or have auditory overlays. We can have in our mind's eye, we can see like short video projections. There are so many ways that we can sense these energies and these kind of beings, but we've been taught very strongly, oh no, that's fantasy. That's the stuff of storybooks. That's not real. And if you talk about it, you get laughed right out of the room. But that doesn't mean they're not real. And so I just thought I'd throw that out there so that people could get an idea of the vast array of beings that we have access to. And ETs and angels is just two of many, many, many different kinds of beings. And cryptids and things like fairies and gnomes, boy, they're elusive. Bigfoot, very elusive, very hard to get physical evidence that these beings exist. But they've existed forever. They're in our folklore.
I have been at a point for a very long time where I struggle with this part of it, that there are multiple different kinds of not only species of aliens, but extraterrestrials and interdimensional beings. And I do have the consideration that there is an ecosystem of life beyond our perception, but what exactly that is, I'm not sure if as humans we could really understand, but it would appear that there are multiple different kinds of intelligences out there. But what I struggle with is people's experiences throughout history and the reports of the phenomena shifting as it relates to our understanding of the world and technology. Example, we used to view these as elves or nature spirits, and the encounters would be similar as, people's abductions, or they'd be taken to different realms, missing time, but fundamentally different types of beings. And as we move on through history, the phenomena shifts. We start to see different types of things in the sky, from saucers to airships, and now we're seeing these shape-shifting plasmoids. But again, I interview so many people who have had quote unquote contact or abduction experiences, and they may report very similar type of beings, but very different messages from the same beings, or it would be the opposite. Very different beings, but reporting to be a certain type of being. And there seems to be this level of shape shifting that is occurring. And I have to consider the possibility that at times what we're dealing with is a manipulative intelligence at times. I think that there is also a duality within the phenomena that we have to look at, that people do have incredible positive experiences, and that translates to beautiful things in their lives. And this has happened with my experiences. This has happened with your experiences. And it can go on the completely opposite end. But I just question all of this because of the ability for whatever this is, it seems, to have an effect on our perception, or it's our perception not being able to catch up to exactly what it is we're interacting with. There's so many different possibilities, but I'll just let you address that before we move on.
Oh, it's a really, really good point, Chris. It's a really important point. And I think that, first of all, we should always maintain our critical thinking. We should always see how things weigh out intuitively towards how we feel inside. But I think, a logical explanation. First of all, we are not given language or words. How do you think about things or communicate things when we don't have language to express it? And that's a piece that's missing from what I call the construct, which is the sort of false matrix, the political, socio-economic, religious, big agri-pharma, medical industry construct we live in that does not have our best interests at heart. And so, if there are natural ways of being that don't support that construct, it's basically vetoed. And language is very much a tool of the so-called parasite class or the ruling elites that are making up the decisions on how they want to basically suck our resources from us and fill their pockets. So there's that. Second of all, so we don't have these concepts. We don't have language. We don't have a conceptual framework to talk about our experiences. So we're filtering everything, as am I, through my perceptual universe, and it's going to come out differently because we're all different people. We have different experiences, different moralities, all different fears, different competencies. And so that explains a lot of the diversity. But there is another thing that I want people to think very seriously of, and that is there is more than enough evidence to indicate we're living in a simulation. That doesn't mean that it's not real. It's absolutely real and has real life experiences. But let me just point to some of the science. So they did an experiment called the double slit experiment, where they shot photons through these slits and they formed a pattern on a wall that received the photons on the other side. And when they did not directly observe these photons in flight or travel, they formed an interference pattern. But as soon as they set up a camera that watched them as they came through the slits and went to hit this surface, they suddenly went from being waves into being particles. They changed the nature of their very structure. So then scientists went even further. And what they did was they had a way to observe at what point do these photons change from waves into particles, from non-physical matter into physical matter. And they found out that when the camera was observing it. When the scientists were observing these photons, they not only turned into particles, but when they looked back to the very source of where the photons were coming from, right, which, so you're talking about an element of time here, they changed into particles at the source. So there's an intelligence to the whole arena of what we consider life and reality. There's an intelligence, and when we observe it as being a specific way, it snaps into being that way. So ultimately, what it means is that all things in creation are in flux. They're not waves, they're not particles. We call them affectionately wavicles in quantum physics. And then once we focus on something, so I see Chris, I see him as being a certain way, sitting in his studio with his microphone, all the other possibilities collapse, and that's what's real to me. And so I think that that explains the diversity and the differences between that and our perceptual arena, and not having language and concepts to talk about these things. It's not like we got a DSM-4 of metaphysical paranormal experiences that we can all refer to, although that might be coming. In some ways, that's another purpose of my book. And so, I don't know, does that make sense to you, Chris?
It does. There would be one more factor I'd have to add, especially for our modern times, and that is the military government manipulation factor.
Yeah.
This, I believe, is causing detrimental harm to our entire planet right now, as far as the psychological operation with UFOs. And it
Mm-hmm.
seems like a very long game to steer humanity in certain directions and have their perception of whatever this phenomena is put into a certain box so that they can control that narrative. But it's
Yep.
becoming more and more weaponized, especially with everything that's been happening just in the past few months. Things seem to be ramping up with a narrative of a threat. The weaponization of the UFO phenomena has to be considered, especially with everything happening right now. And people should always be aware that there is a deception level going on right now, and that's causing a problem with people's perception of the whole phenomena, I think.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to the simulation theory. So we're all under a psyop all the time in more ways than we have any idea what's going on. And that's affecting the way we're perceiving reality. And that is, in effect, causing reality to shift so that those that have the power and control want to maintain that. Absolutely. Now, I've talked to quite a few people on my shows who have had contact with just the grays. Some say that there is a hybrid program. Others say, nope, that's bullshit. There's no hybrid program.
Right.
Some say these orbs and things that are being seen absolutely are the grays. They're in contact with them and they know what's going on. Other
Mm.
people are saying, no, it's a psyop. It's all man made. It's all domestic. Now,
Right.
what's true? I don't know. I am not that kind of a brilliant person to figure that out, but I do think that it might have elements of domestic technologies. We certainly have the ability, or it could be a mix of that and extraterrestrial. But I do know that there has been a threat, a coming threat of a false ET invasion for some time. We've been expecting it, we've been waiting for it. I'm not at all surprised that extraterrestrials are being posed as a threat. They're being seen over Air Force bases and nuclear bomb sites and on and on and on. And it's all being whipped up as being a threat and trying to get us into fear. So, first of all, when we're whipped up into fear, then what happens is we're much easier to control. Look what happened during the COVID era. Need I say more? Okay. Then there's the idea of a false alien threat that we knew was coming. We've known for some time. But then there's the other thing is if it gets people stressed out and arguing over who's right and who's wrong. And again, it dissolves the purity of the contact we could be having with transdimensionals. Now, my book totally turns the UFO and the ET narrative on its head. It's very different than anything out there that I have come across so far. And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying we need to consider all aspects. So my experiences, I believe, are purely transdimensional. I don't have any memories of being picked up by a spaceship. I have very few, or if I have only a couple of incidences where I dealt with beings that you would call grays. I have an image here on my back screen that this is AI generated. I didn't actually have selfies to bring home with me. And it shows on this what I used to look like when I was younger and had really long white hair. But some of the beings look very much like us, and some look a little different. And there's all kinds of diversity. Just like if you take the human race, we're all one race, we're all one family, but we have different skin tones, different eye shapes. Some are fat, some are skinny, some are tall, some are short, some got big ears, some got big noses. We look very different, even from within the same family. You line us up, mother, father, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Wow, there are some that really look different and some that look more similar. Same is true for ET. So I think it's really important, and what my book brings out is that there's great diversity amongst ET. But what I did find was synonymous with all of them was the peaceful intentions, the understanding that when we vibe on the love harmonic, that creates functional lives, functional families, functional communities, functional regions. And this is something that's universal. So one thing that's universal is we don't speak English. We don't speak languages. We communicate through telepathy. And telepathy is not just casting English words into somebody else's head. It's a completely different way of communicating. I get into that in great detail in my book. But it's something that unites all beings, regardless of what dimensional reality, what timeline, their position in the multiverse. One thing that unites all of us is this telepathic way of communicating and vibing on the love harmonic. And love is got actually very little to do with romance. Love is about being patient, being kind, having self-control, taking care of the self. Like we need to learn to love ourselves before we start to love other people and other beings. And we're not taught in our societies on how to love ourselves. And so one thing I did find is that with all the beings that I've had experiences with, is a very, what I call the vibing on the love harmonic. And that requires us to go through our own transformation, which means doing shadow work, which means getting our shit together, which means taking good care of our bodies, our minds, and our spirits, giving ourselves what we need, relying on ourselves as being our internal experts, instead of going to believe so-called experts outside of ourselves. There's so many layers to this. And I think that's what's really important here, is not how weird this being or that being looks, or how tiny they might be, or whether they got wings or not. No, what's important is do they know about love? And the other thing I noticed about the beings I've been in contact with, none of them are religious. None of them are religious. They all believe in a universal consciousness that they're a part of, that they all carry a spark of the divine. And we have the ability to create the most beautiful environment on this planet. We live on a beautiful, beautiful planet. You step outside of the cities and you go into the country and you look at the stars at night and you look at the rivers and the animals and the forest. It's so perfect. What's screwed up on this planet is basically the construct, which has programmed us from before we were born to believe there's a right way and a wrong way of doing it. We need religion, we need politicians.
I want to get deeper into how the construct, the matrix, this false reality came to be in our existence. At least your thoughts on it. Was this always like this? Was this reality in place with the duality, but leaning more towards the dark as far as our systems? Was there an infiltration at some point? What do you think about that? What are some of the possibilities that could be?
I'll tell you what I've learned from being aboard the big ship. So I had a lot of education. I get into that in the book about things just like this. And so what it seems to be is that the beings that I had contact with aboard the big ship, they are at our next stage of development. They're not that far ahead of us. And so it was easy to see where changes need to be made on earth and to ourselves. And it starts with me, myself, becoming the change I want to see in the world. So the way I understand it is there have been in the past beings that came from other, I don't know, I'm going to loosely call it planets. Because I think that there is new ways that we're going to start looking at where we live and the reality and the possibilities for that reality, especially now that we're getting familiar with simulation theory. But anyway, there were beings that came down. And so the humans that were here looked upon them as gods. And these beings loved it. They just ate it all up, right? They love being gods, but they're not gods. They're just at a different stage of technological development than us, right? But they pass themselves off as gods. And one thing humans really like is power, because really, what does money mean, and what does position mean? It means power. Humans go nuts when we get the sense of a little bit of power. I don't know if you saw that during the COVID era too, but oh my God, there were so many Nazis everywhere in the stores and in the police departments. They were all enforcing because they had a little bit of power. It was like really gross, right? And so they gave some of the humans this elevated position. And believe me, all of this is a construct. None of this is real. It's only real when we believe it's real. So I'm going to just flash over to a couple of things to make what I'm saying more understandable by the general public. Take a look at the Wizard of Oz and the little dog Toto, who pulls back the curtain, and they see there is no wizard. There's just an old man pulling levers and dials and things, trying to trick everyone into thinking he's the mighty, all-knowing wizard, right? And it's all bullshit. It's all smoke and mirrors and bullshit. And another example is the story called The Emperor Has No Clothes, right? And the little kid, everybody has to believe that the emperor has all these beautiful clothes. Well, little boy looks at him and says, ha, 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 he's naked. So the same thing is true for us. And I think this started probably tens or even hundreds of thousands of years ago with these advanced races that came down. And so we were forced into subjection, and we were forced to agree. And pretty soon we said it, and we were forced to believe it long enough and hard enough that it became real to us. And that's how the false matrix and the construct was originally formed. And it's been carried on now for, like I said, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. You really see it when you understand history and you look at the monarchy and how the ruling class decided what colors people could wear, who could hunt and have fresh meat, and who had to live off of rotten legumes and grains and things, and a completely different set of rules for the so-called elites that they bought into their own bullshit, that they're so high and mighty and so superior, and we're just a bunch of scummy serfs and slaves, and we don't matter, even to the point where I believe there have been significant resets every 100, even 200 years. When you do research into Tartaria or the mud floods or the orphan trains, you start to get a different picture where you realize there's been constantly, there's been genocides and starting overs, because otherwise we start to smarten up. So we're at the point now, we're starting to smarten up. We're starting to see it for what it is. We're starting to come into our power and our sovereignty. Well, my God, the powers that be can't have that. And so I know you can get into stories of the archons, and that might be true too, and everything else, and beings that feed off of our negative emotions and all that. That might be true too. I don't know. I'm not an expert, right?
Mm.
And but this is what I think happened. And so even though the humans back when they made contact with these um, races of humanoids that came from, I don't know, lack of a better term, let's just say star systems. They believed they were gods and they passed themselves off as gods, and they were not gods. And they probably messed with our DNA to shorten our lifespans and to make us weaker and stuff. And, that's not much different than what's going on today. Anyway, I probably babbled enough, but that's my take on it, Chris. And I'm sticking to my story. And a lot of that is also exposed in my book. So my book is not just about, oh, I met ET and this is what they looked like and this is what we did and I was on their ship. It's a juxtaposition of our society and these beings that are at our next stage of development and what we need to do to be able to take our place alongside all these other beings who can teach us a whole lot and, help us to overcome our fear. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. Where would you like to go next? Is there anything particular you'd like to bring up from your book?
Yeah, I would like to say just a few words about the big ship itself. It's like nothing anybody else has been talking about. So, on a Star Trek or Star Wars image of a big ship, there's all these dials and panels, and humanoids are sitting there, and they're constantly recalibrating screens and doing all this. Well, there was none of that on the big ship. So first of all, the big ship is massive, holds millions of beings comfortably. So these are what we would call city ships. They're so big, some of them are even bigger than the earth. They're that big. They're huge. You can't even imagine how big they are. Second thing is they're conscious. They're actually living beings. They have to be in order to travel transdimensionally. We have a technology in us, in our physiology and our biology, that allows us to travel transdimensionally, and the same is true for the big ship. So there are what you might call engineers that live aboard the big ship. They communicate directly with the big ship, make sure they take care of its needs. If it has any, it might need to have energy, its energy is restored. It might need have different needs. So that was the other thing that was really interesting. So what powers the big ship?
Now, can I
Well,
ask you,
we
is
do.
this ship, would you consider it etheric or
No,
is
it's
it physical?
physical.
It's a physical ship.
Well, it is and it isn't. Okay, so if you ask me, where is the big ship? Is it in the Pleiades? Is it in, this galaxy, that galaxy? No, it's not in anywhere. It's not anywhere. If you imagine for a moment a Venn diagram, and imagine that Venn diagram is made up of a multitude of ovals. And imagine that each oval represents a different dimensional reality, a different timeline, a different possibility in the multiverse, the spiritual realms, and on and on. And there's more than one oval for each of those. There's almost infinite number. And imagine them being arranged like a daisy. And in the center, all of these realms overlap. And that's interdimensional space. And the big ship sits in an envelope, an interdimensional envelope, so that beings from all kinds of realities can access the big ship, coming and going, getting training, participating in all kinds of scientific expeditions. I get into that in the book. It's really quite exciting. So the big ship itself is alive. And how it gets its energy is that actually the beings aboard the big ship have created ritual. So what happens is when the big ship needs more energy, basically we all know about it. We're telepathic and we all get together on a specific day. They don't have days and nights. It's another thing that's in the book. But let's just say day. And we all are ready to donate some of our life force. And so the big ship emits these tones. We go into a deep meditative state. And the big ship absorbs a little bit of our life force from all of us. And that's how it gets its energy. Makes sense. And we can replenish our stores of life force energy. I personally had to go down to the healing pods. That's all in my book because I felt really exhausted. I could barely walk after I participated in this ritual. But they have the healing pods. So I got right as rain very quickly, explain all about that in the book. But yeah, so it's an actual living thing. And I was there physically. I have been there etherically, but I've also been there physically where I'm eating foods, I'm sleeping, I'm hanging out with other beings, I'm going on expeditions. Like it was an amazing, amazing thing. And I get into how I believe that was possible. I think that they actually have a system of what I call clones. I don't know if they're synthetic, whether they're biologic, whether they're printed, 3D printed. Like, I don't know the details. I don't have all the answers. I just share my experience in the book. And we can easily leave our bodies behind and have a consciousness transfer. Enter one of these clone bodies. There's two kinds. There's the generic clones that all basically look the same. And that's good for beings that are only there for like a day or two. You don't necessarily eat or even go to the bathroom when you're in one of those. You don't need to. But then there's also an identical clone, and I had one that was made for me, and it looked like me, except, of course, no wrinkles or no imperfections, and I didn't have to wear glasses when I was there, and I felt fantastic. And then it was, I'll tell you, a real bummer to wake up back at home and back in my body with my arthritis and my aches and pains and fumbling for my glasses again. But the biggest disappointment to coming back was to have to re-embed myself into the mainstream reality after being in this incredible, loving, peaceful, interesting environment. It was very difficult to come back, but I was only gone every night for 3 months and then it ended. And the reason I believe is because I had more than enough to write the book. Mm-hmm. And the reason I wrote the book was to help other people understand what's possible and to add my perspective into the narrative, the UFO ET narrative, because it's very different and it's very valid. And that way people are less likely to get sucked into a psyop and to believe that things are this way or that way when it comes to UFOs and ETs.
Now, what would you tell people that would question if you were just having a very vivid dream or not? Because as I recall, you had these experiences after going to sleep at night, and you'd wake up whenever the time period was after having these experiences on the ship, as you were describing. But I heard many people's experiences that have had maybe very profound dreams where they've lived another lifetime, or even meditative or psychedelic experiences where people claim to actually live entire lives with different beings on different planets. And to me, that could be just as real as this reality. We could be experiencing these lifetimes in these different realms just by shifting our consciousness to that frequency, or however this is occurring within our consciousness. But for those that would say that it was just a dream, what would you tell them?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, if they want to do some research into the Monroe Institute has a system of meditation that's assisted by listening to beats or whatever on headphones. And they have found that when we, well, basically, let me just back that up. First of all, we know scientifically that we flash like a strobe light. And we flash into existence 22 trillion times a second. This happens too fast for our perception to even be aware of it. So when we're not here, where are we? We're in transdimensional space. Second thing is write down the microcosm when you look at subatomic particles. They are not orbiting around a nucleus. They are here and then they're there and they're on and they're off. Same system. So now go back to the Monroe Institute. By doing these meditations, you actually can blink outside of our reality. So we're blinking into another reality where there is no time and there is no space. And you could quite literally live 1,000 lifetimes and then come back, and you have not even been gone a second. Absolutely scientifically proven. So there's that. The second thing I want to say is when I dream, it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. It's disjointed. I'm out with my friends, and the next thing you know, I'm bouncing a ball, and then I'm eating ice cream, and then I'm on a boat, and none of it makes any sense. And even when I wake up and I'm thinking, the hell was that? It doesn't make any sense. It's disjointed. And one dream to another, there's no carryover, there's no continuity. Right. And some nights I might not remember any of my dreams, and some nights I might remember them. That's REM, rapid eye movement, sleep. And that's not the same as transdimensional. So for the 3 months that I was having transdimensional experiences, I was not having REM. I would wake up exhausted, Chris. So I'd go to bed at night. Then my consciousness would be transferred somewhere else, whole different, I call it a time dilation. I get into that in the book. Whole different way of spending time, which again is a construct. And I would experience days, weeks, even months of activity, just the same as sometimes people have that experience on DMT or other psychedelics. Then I would wake up in the morning, be back home. What the hell just happened? When I would go back to sleep that night, I continued from the very point I left off in the morning time. And the same thing happened. And it was devastating to my reality because I couldn't go out and be around people. I couldn't live a normal life. I couldn't function because I had days, weeks, and months of reality that I had to somehow come to terms with. In the beginning, I thought I was dreaming. Then I thought I was crazy. But then I started to realize, no, this is something else. And it was given to me so that I could pass on my adventures with humanity. And it's taken me years. This happened in 2014. In 2017, I started to get a bit of my equilibrium. I started to share some of it on your shows in 2019. Boy, I've known you for quite a while. And you've come a long way, baby. I'm really proud of you. But, and then writing the book, that really made it so that I had to put it into a framework that other people would then be able to receive it and understand it. So that was no small thing. And so I don't remember everything, but I remember what was important, what I was supposed to pass on. So that's why I don't believe that I was simply dreaming. And I didn't use any psychedelics. I didn't even smoke pot when I was having those experiences. So I can't explain. I did have some significant trauma to bring it back to where we started the conversation. I think it opened me up to having these transdimensional realities, but it wasn't until I left religion and I was ready psychologically to handle it that it was given to me. And I had my experience with an angel before I had my extraterrestrial experiences. So it's kind of like opening up to different levels of reality. I get into all of that in my book as well.
Right. Well, closing thoughts. If I had to give my theory as to what this transdimensional contact is really all about, if indeed there are non-human intelligences guiding us in certain ways, which it would definitely seem there is based on my own and many others like yourself experience, that it's all about us as humanity becoming self-sufficient and not having to rely on, first of all, the negative anti-human systems that we're subjected to, and then any type of authority outside of ourselves, even these beings, even these extraterrestrials, even what we would consider interdimensional beings or angels, that we are being led to be self-sufficient, to go off of our own intuition and our own knowledge and our own morality, and not have to question this or rely on a god or deity or an alien to tell us what's right and wrong. We should just be there. And I think possibly that's what this contact is really all about. And it may include a series of tests for certain individuals. It may be different for every person, but as a whole, it seems to be leading people to be better people overall. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And when I was talking about the emperor having no clothes or Toto pulling back the curtain, and we realize the wizard is no wizard at all, these powers that be can only continue when we give them the power, when we believe in their lies and their systems and their psyops. As soon as we start to think for ourselves, and that's what I believe extraterrestrials and other higher beings want, for us to think for ourselves and to create our own reality. And as soon as we take back our sovereignty and we take our power back, these other beings, they can't function. We'll have no more faith in their money system, no more faith in their politics, no more faith in all their lies. We're getting to that point. We're saying enough is enough. And we're just going to focus on becoming better quality people, loving ourselves, taking good care of ourselves, eating better, loving better. We're starting to realize that we're all addicted to a dopamine rush, from our cell phones and stuff. We're going to start putting that down and spending more time outside. People are going to start coming together and singing songs and running foot races and God knows whatever we want. There's going to be a whole new reality. And we don't have to punish the those that control the construct. They will just lose all their power. That'll be punishment enough. They'll be walking around and we won't hire them and we don't want to hang out with them and we have no respect for them, and they're just going to be lost because without their so-called illusion of power, they have nothing. And so this is what this is really all about. And, again, we'll start having shaman. Well, we already do. We got Frank Castle and we got all kinds of shaman who are able to help us when we get stuck. But basically, we don't need helpers. We can do this on our own. We can realize that we have great power, great potential. We're going to have free energy. We're going to get rid of all the chemicals, all the lies. We're going to be healthy. We're going to be in harmony and natural resonance with the planet and the animals. Oh my God, there's no end. There's no shortage. There's no shortage of resources. I mean, no other animal has to pay for its shelter and its food. Will fall into a natural system. It's going to be great. And so, we got to start living it now. That's what I think.
That's definitely a possibility I can get behind. And I do believe that individually we can make more change by implementing those things that you were just mentioning in our own lives. And it has a huge effect on the rest of our existence. So, amazing stuff, Karen. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences again. Before we go, remind the audience once more where they can find your podcast and get your books.
Okay, so the book is available on Amazon worldwide. It's a new publication, so you may have to go to the bookstore or the Kindle store in order to find it and order it, but it should be available in whatever country you're in. And I want to remind people I have two podcasts. One is every Wednesday, the Quantum Guide Show at 1 o'clock Mountain Time, 3 p.m. Eastern, or noon Pacific. It's a live show. I have guests from all walks of life, all over the world. They all have something positive and wonderful to offer. And you're welcome to join us in the live chat and be part of the show. And then on Sundays, I have the Aliens and Angels podcast, where right now I'm sharing excerpts from my book, but I often have guests, and all the guests and myself are experiencers. We're not researchers, we're actual experiencers, and we give our take on the whole ET narrative. And again, that's a live show that runs an hour earlier, so it's 11 a.m. Pacific, noon Mountain, or 2 p.m. Eastern. And come and join us in the live chat, ask your questions, add your comments, become part of the community. You're more than welcome. And then again, I have my website, which is one stop for everything. I got my podcasts on there. I've got a shop. I've got all kinds of information and tons of free resources. And that you can find Karen Holton healthcoach.com. And besides that, I'm part of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, and you can hear all my content on audio by accessing forbiddenknowledge.news.
That is right. Thank you, Karen. We will definitely be doing this again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We will talk again tomorrow.